Everybody, Cybertel here. We just finished the second game of the World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Carlsen-Nepomniachtchi. This was a fascinating game. This was a lot of hand-to-hand combat, and there had a lot of tactical complexity here. This is the sort of chess that we were hoping to see when Nepomniachtchi qualified, and we have not been disappointed so far. Just a quick warning, this is an incredibly complex game. This video will be fairly called a summary. I'm going to be going over the key moments and looking at some of the most important variations. I'm going to be skipping a lot because there's a lot of variations in this game. As usual, I'll include the complete PGN file in the video comments. Take a look at that to get a full picture of the game. I'm going to be, for time constraints, I'm going to be skipping over a lot here. So look at the game notes, but I'll be looking at the most important moments with you here. Carlsen is white, d4, e6. So Nepomniachtchi offers the opportunity to go into the Nimzo. It seems like it's been a while since Black has really been in trouble in the Nimzo at the top level. I think f3 seems to be the line that gets the most theoretical juice for White nowadays at the top, but I think even here, Black is doing fine. So Carlsen plays knight f3 to skip over the Nimzo Indian, and then Black says he's okay with going into a queen's gambit now that White's committed to knight f3. It eliminates a lot of dangerous lines in the queen's gambit declined, where the knight goes to e2 instead. That allows f3 and e4. But Carlsen doesn't go for the queen's gambit with knight c3. Instead, we get the Catalan. This has a bit of a reputation as being a quiet positional opening. In my opinion, that's a little bit unfair. If one or both sides are looking for a fight, this opening can hot up pretty quickly. And we certainly see that in this game. This turned into hand-to-hand pretty quickly. Bishop e7, a little bit of an old-fashioned choice. The modern move order is this. You see this in the Queen's Indian a lot as well. Black checks on b4 to lure the bishop to d2, and then drops back to e7 where it intends to go. It's not a big deal, just sort of a slight opening detail. But bishop e7 is perfectly fine. 2 castle. dx4. So this isn't mandatory, but this is the most popular line. It's Black's main choice by quite a bit. c6 would be sort of an old-fashioned closed Catalan. It's been a while since we've seen this line at the top, because White just gets a very risk-free advantage here. e6, e4. Black should really take on e4, but bishop e7 is actually a main line for some reason. You still see this a lot today. White's just better here, and he's better by a lot. White has a huge edge in space, and Black has nothing to compensate for that lack of space. This is a dream Catalan for White. This is like a this is also like a dream advanced French or a dream King's Indian attack. This is exactly what you want when you play the Catalan. White can squeeze this position forever. So dx4, it's just correct. It stops Black from getting squeezed and keeps the position free. Queen c2, looking to get the pawn back. b5. So this is the first interesting decision of the game. So a6 is the most popular move here, and it's the most popular by a factor of 10. White has two main options here. Avrook has vacillated between these two options in his d4 repertoires. Queen xc4, this also has advocates. Black plays b5, and then the bishop comes to b7 to contest the Catalan bishop. So White has often looked to play a4 to stop b5 first, and then take on c4. And this is a very typical Catalan situation. So White has a nice edge in central space. In return, Black has a good grip in the central squares. Plus, we have this little outpost in b4 that we can look to take advantage of. I would say this is strategically balanced. This is going to be a tough game to come. b5 certainly leads to a much more confrontational game. And it immediately leads to the first very interesting decision of the game. So knight e5, this is very un-Carlsen-like. I saw a lot of people praising Team Carlsen's preparation after this game, and I'm not exactly sure why, because objectively, Carlsen did not get a good position out of the game, and objectively, this move is just not correct. If Carlsen were like a aggressive tactical player that enjoys murky positions, maybe you would play a slightly aggressive move like this that has some objective downside to subjectively reap some benefits. But the correct move is a4. And that just leads to positions that Carlsen, based on his style, would love to milk for the next 60, 70 moves. b4 is forced. If white plays c6, or black plays c6, knight g5. And this is another downside to knight e5. Knight g5 in these sorts of positions is a very common Catalan tactical device. White unmasks the long diagonal. Black can't cover up this long diagonal now because of queen x8 mate. This is a very common tactical device in the Catalan. By playing knight e5, this robs white of a lot of his tactical arrows from his quiver, which means a lot of these positions aren't working as well without that tactical device. If black plays bishop e7, white's just up a pawn. Black has some compensation for sure, but white can play this position forever with no risk. Only white can win this position. So b4 is forced. Knight fd2 is correct, unmasking the long diagonal. And here, theory stretches on for a little while longer, but this is the wrong position to be giving long tactical lines. White is just better here. When you play the Catalan or some lines at the ready like this, this is the position you want. White's better here. Bishop on g2 is very strong. Black is weak in his queen side with this b4 push that allows that nice c4 outpost, also c5 outpost in some positions. White's just better here, and he can push for the next 60 or 70 moves. This is the sort of position you would think Carlsen would love to milk, so I'm very interested what they were thinking when they chose this 95 move, because objectively in the game, it did not work out. Carlsen did not get any benefits from this 95 move. c6, another way to diffuse this choice from white. It's queen x d4. This is a very typical choice in this position. Just immediately sacrificing the exchange. So knight x f7 looks correct here. If white just immediately takes, I think black is certainly not worse here. You know, black has 2 pawns for the exchange. Usually when you have 2 pawns for the exchange, you're doing pretty well. These pawns on the queen side are already quite strong and quite mobile. Yeah, this is quite nice for black. I don't see white having any advantage here whatsoever. So knight x f7. Knight a6, threatening knight b4, so a3 is forced. And I don't think black is worse here. White has definite compensation for the pawn for sure. But I don't think it's more than compensation. I think black is doing perfectly fine here. So this is another way to diffuse this knight e5 choice. And it seems like it takes a lot of the fun out of the position. So I don't see the idea behind knight e5. I don't see the big theoretical surprise. What is the big point of avoiding that favorable a4 line for white? I'm not seeing it. But c6 is working well. It's perfectly fine as well. So a4, knight d5, that's forced, blocking up the long diagonal. Knight c3, we don't want to take on b5. That's resolving the tension way too early. Knight c3 is correct. f6, so this is the correct timing. Pushing this knight back at exactly the correct moment. Either this knight's going to go to an incredibly awkward square, or it's going to correctly retreat to f3 but clog up the long diagonal. So knight f3 is correct, knight g4 is a big error, just misplacing the knight. But on f3 it's blocking this strong bishop on g2, so this allows black to consolidate his position. Queen d7, so this allows white to head towards exactly the sort of position that he wants when he plays this way against Catalan. b4 is critical here, getting these queenside pawns moving. So obviously the knight can't take. This is a very strong position for black. He's simply up a pawn here. And this bishop on g2 is just completely shut out now. So knight e4. Bishop a6. So developing and guarding this pawn on c4, that's correct. Knight d7. So white is still down a pawn. He does have some compensation here. So he's got the bishop pair. But black is on the verge of chopping on c5. So white needs to play concretely here. So e4. b3. This is pretty much a forced line. And it would be interesting to know if Carlsen's preparation included this position, because it's more or less pretty much forced less from b4. It's certainly forced from this moment. And I'm not seeing an advantage here for white. It's an interesting position, but this is at least equal for black. I don't think black is in danger of being dangerously worse here. He's still up the exchange. He has this pawn on b3 that can easily tie black down. And this isn't the sort of position where the bishop pair typically flourishes. So yeah, I would be really interested to know if this was part of Carlsen's preparation. Queen d7 lets white off the hook. So e4, queen e2. So suddenly you can see white's position is a lot more healthy. White's got this nice central duo. He's got pressure on b5. He's got the possibility of the d5 pawn break to open things up. This is suddenly a little bit nicer for white. Knight e3. Knight 8a6 is more accurate. Black just really needs to get mobilized. I found some very interesting lines here. I want to highlight one of them. So d5, dxa4, knight d4. So this is very interesting. This is re-unleashing the bishop on g2 and pressuring both these points. Cx d5. The most interesting line here, and this is the one I want to highlight. e5. This is a very interesting move that I spent some time looking at. Bishop b7 is the best move. d5. And this looks precisely balanced after all this insanity. Again, this is another line to take a look at in the game notes, because I am skipping a lot of the details here. But knight 8, a6 looks slightly more accurate. It looks more testing, because it forces white to find some very accurate attacking moves. Because once black starts mobilizing and developing, he's up a pawn. And if white doesn't make some concrete threats or gains, that material advantage is going to matter more and more once black finishes mobilization. So knight e3, a little bit less accurate in my opinion. e5, so this is an excellent move. So gaining space, opens the bishop back up. This is exactly how you want to play. Bishop e7, this looks a little bit inaccurate. It's not really an improvement on the bishop. Black really needs to achieve c5 to make this move worthwhile. f5 looks the most accurate. It's depriving white of this e4 square for his pieces. This is another position where some very hilarious attacking details can happen. I'll just give a quick one. Knight c2. The most interesting, bishop f4. So this leads to a fantastic position. It leads to a fantastic move that I found, that I certainly want to highlight. Six. And the move that I found in this particular position, queen c6, rook d6. And this leads to an incredibly interesting position. It's very unlikely the game would have reached this position. But I just love the idea behind this. So black really can't take here. But it leaves this incredibly irrational position where black is up 2 rooks for a knight. And not even extra pawns, but these 2 pawns in d6 and e6 are so incredibly strong that they're just completely winning for white. And their strengths show themselves as you continue to look through the game. You know, black just can't stop these pawns. And it's completely... But again, just a fun little line that I found. In general, though, f5 is the most accurate. Just black needs to get down to the business of development and mobilization, and f5 helps hold the position while black continues that mobilization. You know, white will continue to push and play aggressive moves, and then it's up to black to mobilize properly in the face of that. But bishop e7 allows white to keep the e4 squared for his pieces, which is favorable. So e takes, and knight e4. And now suddenly, black is regretting not playing f5, because this knight, if it ever lands in c5, it's going to be a very strong piece. Plus it helps mitigate against black playing c5, which leaves this bishop at b7 quite weak. So knight a6, knight e5. This is the first really clear error of the game. Bishop e3 is my personal preference. So simply develop, and it keeps a grip on the c5 square. Knight e5. This is fine now, because this knight can't hop to c5 anymore. So knight e5 is fine now. c5. Giving back material to free this light square bishop is a good idea. And just a quick line. And I think white has a little bit of something to work with here. This knight on d4 is pretty nice, and this e-pawn is better than black's d-pawn. So this is a little bit of something for white to work with. So, but in general here, knight e5 is just a very clear error. Finish your development. If we want to take something general from this position, the side that finishes their mobilization first generally is going to be better off. So knight e5. And that allows this knight into this very strong c5 square, which will lead to this knight hopping into b3. So this is pretty critical for white suddenly. Knight d6. So this knight on d6 is strong, but knight b3, and suddenly both of these knights are incredibly strong. This is a critical position for white suddenly. Knight x a4 is a serious alternative for black. I don't want to go over the lines because they get incredibly complex, and I want to keep this video down for time purposes. Going to the game notes to look over that and leads to some very fun positions. But knight b3 is simpler for black. Over the board, I would play that move. Rook b1. This is a very passive move, and it puts white on the verge of defeat. Bishop b3. Again, just finish mobilization. The side that finishes their development is going to be typically the happiest. c1. This is more or less the main line to this. Queen e4, just in time to stop c5. Bishop c5, so that permanently blockades the c5 move. And here, I think white has enough for the exchange. So, black is up a rook versus a knight, but this knight into d6 is incredibly strong. And this bishop on a6 has still not been properly resolved. If you manage to teleport this bishop to d5, that would definitely change the valuation, because that would be a very strong piece. But this bishop on a6 is very passive. All of white's pieces make a lot of sense. But again, if you want to take a general principle, finish your mobilization. Don't play passive moves. Get your pieces out and moving around. Rook b1, I mean, you're losing the exchange anyway, so you might as well get your pieces developed at the same time. So black just trades off, and this allows more simplification of material as well, which if you're up in exchange and a pawn, typically you want to simplify material. So this is definitely Carlsen on the verge of defeat here. Bishop a8. Don't play passively. This bishop on a8 is a very marginal piece. Rooks like open files, so bx-a4, it shreds the pawn structure, but it opens up files. When you're up in exchange, you want to get those rooks going. So this rook on b8 very much benefits from this move. Just a quick line, c5. This is taking advantage of this pen on the d file, and it's resolving this light square bishop finally. Queen c8. Rook d2, notice rook d7 just falls off to that. And the knight on f6 is strong. But black is up a humongous amount of material. Black is up an exchange and a pawn. And there are no mating threats materializing because of this knight on f6 just yet. So this is Nepomniachtchi on the verge of winning, more or less. Bishop a8 is just way too passive. That's a very poor piece. bx-a4 is just more aggressive. Just open the position up when you're up in exchange. c4. c3. This is even more drift. So this black should not be spending time in a sharp position giving a pawn back. g6 looks best. This is the main line that I found. h4, looking to pressure the king side a little bit with h5. bx-a4, again, when you're up in exchange, you want to open up files. You don't want to close up position where the rooks don't have room to operate. You know, the knight in d6 is quite strong, so if the position stays closed, this knight could just end up being the best piece on the board. So black needs to open up files for his pieces to work, especially his rooks. Forward, knight f6, c3. Now this makes sense because this pawn is going to be a strong passed A pawn. dc. And white has some activity. This is not as bad as a previous note. But this is still, black is still up in exchange in a pawn. And this bishop on a8 is a very poor piece. But this pawn is a strong pass pawn as well. Black is still much better here. But c3 is just, it's not a valuable investment of time in a sharp position. Queen c2. This was praised after the game by Nepomniachtchi. I don't understand why, though. Black is likely to play g6 anyways to blunt out this bishop. So why spend time to force your opponent to make a move that they're going to make anyways? g6 looks... bxc3 looks better. And we move to queen c2 here to get this pawn in a4 back. This transposes to the game. This is an equal position, but by playing queen c2 immediately, this allows black an option. So bxa4, this transposes the previous note, but it's inaccurate. Queen g7 is best here. Now, the square on e4 is not available to the knight, so pressuring the e5 pawn creates an awkward situation for white. So the main line that I found was f4, g5. Again, when you have rooks, when you're up in exchange, you want to play aggressively and open up files. So g5 is completely typical here. Queen b3. And this is pretty forced. And there's still complications here. This is not a simple position at all. So there's still potential for Carlsen to outplay Nepomniachtchi somewhat here. But objectively, black is just much better here. Black's... this situation in the d-file, white needs to move this rook somewhere. So maybe like rook e1. But this is much, much better for black. This passed e pawn is still going to be quite strong. But there's going to be a passed a pawn as well. But dxa4, it voluntarily creates targets for white. Now, suddenly white has this target on a7. He's got a target on c6. That includes the weak e-pawn. White has some things that he can pressure here. So queen e7. Rook fd8 was playing the game. Queen e7 is a little bit better in my opinion. But I think white has sufficient compensation here suddenly. So this rook can land on d6 to pressure the e6 pawn. The c pawn is going to end up being weak. The a7 pawn is already weak. This looks like enough counterplay for white. Okay, 1, c5. Looking to finally resolve the light square bishop, but it's a little bit late. Knight d6 was played. Queen x c5 is also possible. This also looks balanced. White's got a pawn for the exchange here. Knight d6 looks safer. In this particular position, keeping the queens on is safer for white. Just so he always has more counterplay against the exposed black king. Rook b6, queen takes now. King g2. The position is getting more simplified, so a lot of the complications are drained out of the position. c4, this more or less gives up. Black can play rook a8 to think about pushing the a-pawn. But this is an unbreakable standoff. Queen c7 more or less just invites white to simplify. Rook c6, this isn't forced, but black doesn't have any winning chances left, and he's actually in a little bit of danger if he tries in a weird way. Queen d7 holds the pawn, but... And here, black's best bet is to just chase the rook around endlessly. This can actually get a little bit dangerous for black on the king side if he tries something weird. So rook x d6 just gives back the exchange. But this leads to 3 versus 2 on the king side. I won't cover this end of the game because it truly is a routine draw at the top level. Maybe on board 10 of your local weekend tournament, this might be dangerous for black. But this is pretty routine. And they agree to a draw 10 moves from now. 3 versus 2 in the king. On one side of the board is always going to be a draw at top level. So, fascinating fight. I think Nepomniachtchi missed some genuine chances in the complications here. I think, first off, Carlsen's choice of knight e5, this isn't going to be repeated. This was certainly one-trick pony. I think Carlsen might try the Catalan again, because if he gets this position again, he'll be very happy to play a4 and just play that position forever. But I think if Nepomniachtchi had this position over again, I think b4 here was really his genuine chance in the opening to get a very dangerous position. But after queen d7, even here, Carlsen went astray in the complications. Even after getting a genuinely promising position. It's hard to say where his preparation ended or began. It's hard to say if knight e5... I don't believe knight e5 would have been preparation, because bishop e3 is such a clear move when looking at position while preparing. But this is definitely a genuine opportunity for Nepomniachtchi. You know, if Nepomniachtchi had this position over again, I think he'd be just thrilled, especially after rook b1. This puts Carlsen genuinely on the verge of defeat in a very passive position. But it shows at the top level that you need to play with just complete precision, because even a position like this, where you're up an exchange and a pawn, and you think everything's just going to be routine, you just play inaccurate moves, 2 moves in a row, and suddenly it's gone from winning to balanced. So, very interesting fight, very interesting positional scuffle, interesting opening. I don't think we're going to see... I'd be surprised if we see the Catalan again, obviously. I think Carlsen's going to move on to exploring some different areas of Nepomniachtchi's repertoire. So, interesting game. Hope you enjoyed the analysis. Like I said, check the game notes for the complete details, because some of these positions are so complicated that this would be an hour-long video if we went over those thoroughly. But my name's John. I'll see you for Game 3.